There's live.
There it is.
We're live. Wonderful. Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome to the inaugural 0th episode of Precisely Anything, a podcast / conversation / dialogue / nattering session between myself and Jay, and really anyone else who we can convince to join us. Today we have with us Michael Alcock, a longtime friend, and I will say maven on the subject of how conversation should work. And so we're going to start out with this episode 0, mostly just talking about what exactly we are doing here, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, how we might do it in the future, all those sorts of conversations that are good to have about how you want to make something happen. And that's us today. So let's get going. Before we turn this on, Michael was just laying out some thoughts that he had been having about how he'd been trying to make conversations happen in some prior podcast experience that he had going. And so we started talking. He had some cool ideas, and we thought, let's turn the camera on. So I'll hand it back to you, Michael, and you can tell us all about that.
Well, thanks for having me, you guys. It's nice to be here. My experiments were all around the idea of how to create effective dialogue in a session. And this comes from my experience at Microsoft doing global CIO summits, where for 3 days, we'd have 1/3 of Microsoft's revenue packed into a room, and we had to make sure that whatever was happening on the stage was going to be compelling content. And that was my job. And it's really hard to convince really famous and powerful people to have genuine dialogue on a stage in front of powerful people. And so I became a little bit obsessed with this concept over those years. And then when I started playing with podcasts and these kind of concepts, I experimented with it. And it really came down to what you were talking about, Tron, which is discovering why you want to have a conversation to begin with, and how do you get to a format that encourages what I would call genuine dialogue, or the idea that your guests forget that they are talking to an audience, right, and really just enjoy talking to the hosts and just really getting. And I've tried many different formats. There are standard formats for, like, formats is the wrong word for it, but preconceived notions for why we're talking, right?
Yeah. Or approaches to the conversational destination.
Right. So like standard number one is like Jay and Trond have a perspective, and they interview famous people and they bring their perspective to their interview style. Jay and Trond happen to be a very funny duo. They're professional comedians, and no matter who they interview, it's going to be.
I'm going to look funny, but I'll give you.
Right.
Professional comedians is right.
Another format is Jay and Trond are intensely interested in learning something, and so they give themselves permission to keep asking, but why?
Yeah.
Right?
Insatiably curious as an approach.
Insatiably curious. I'm going to try and answer this though, because this is actually a really good thing for us to do. Because I think of this episode 0 as an opportunity for us really to explore the why are we doing this thing here? What are we trying to achieve? Why should anyone ever care? Why should we bother doing it? And so for me, I have always been interested in podcasts as a medium for getting to know and hearing the thoughts in a not particularly well-polished form of interesting people. And so for me, I got into podcasts back 20 years ago, listening to the Are You Serious show and a couple of other sort of early podcasts, where their whole thing was, hell, this is a new medium. Let's just hang out and talk to people who are interesting and see what happens. And I really like that. I really like that format. I really like the way in which you can sort of feel like you understand these people and actually want to participate in the people. But the challenge with it, of course, is that I'm hearing this after the conversation. I'm not there to have a conversation with them. So it's still me as audience listening to them as interlocutors or people having a conversation. And so one of the things we're really interested in here is basically just experimenting with how can we, using streaming and podcasts, explore more interesting conversations with more interesting people, to learn cool stuff, teach each other cool stuff, explore ideas, play with ideas. That for me is very much where all this sort of came from. And so the concept for Precisely Anything came from a walk that Jay and I had wandering around Green Lake here in Seattle. We walked for an hour, we talked about podcasts. We said, why don't we do it? Sounds like fun. It was a very, very easy conversation. And so we've been bouncing this around for a while. We've come up with a few different formats and things that we're trying. But it's been interesting experiment so far. So we're probably going to be trying a bunch of different formats. I'll mention one of the formats that we're quite keen on, which is the idea of inviting a group of people, not just 3, but maybe 4 people to be on camera. The idea is that we want to participate as much as we can. We want to have at least one person in any conversation that is someone who is new to the group, someone who's bringing a fresh perspective, maybe a subject matter expert on something. But then we also want to be able to bring in someone else who has been there before to sort of round out the group and give us a chance to sort of have more back and forth about things rather than just, you know how interviews tend to be sort of a person asks a question, a person answers questions. We would like it to be more round in circles.
I think it would be interesting if they're often kind of orthogonal or just unrelated to the areas of expertise or specialization.
Or even opposed. Even opposed, or maybe not opposed in the sense
like they're a wild card.
But, but like if we've got so it's I look at it as a valve that lets us add diversity. It might be ideological diversity, it might be intellectual diversity, it might be gender diversity, it might be racial diversity. It's a way to say, here's an extra person to join the conversation who is different to what's here, and we would like to explore if that's a format that works. I don't know if that works. We haven't tried it yet. So that's one of the things we've talked about. There are other sorts of formats that we've talked about, including a cool one that Michael's going to tell us about in a bit. But we're definitely going to be exploring it. So Precisely Anything is, I would say, a bit of an experimental podcast in the sense that we're trying things out to see what works, and we'll go from there.
Well, it's funny, when I used to work for Microsoft doing these global CIO summits, I would have all these ideas, right, for how we were going to do this or that with this global CIO, or we'll get Nate Silver to come and we'll talk about this, and most of my life was just getting shot down, right? Because people who had been doing this for 30 or 40 years had so much experience with how to fail, and how to have something just go off the rails, in a horrible way. And so it was very rare that I got to try truly experimental stuff. I had to sell it and sell it and sell it. And then it because basically when it's that big, if it wasn't guaranteed to be a success, you weren't going to be allowed to do it. So,
I just going to point out one of the reasons we're doing one of the whole points for us about doing this as a stream is because we're interested in seeing what happens. Can we make these conversations live with people rather than just us doing it?
Yeah. So somebody
who is that? Is that one of you?
I have no idea. It might be a friend of mine.
If it is a random extra person, welcome. We like having you here. Man. If it's someone who knows it, who's pranking us, awesome. That's fantastic. But this is so true.
So there we go. I would have drawn to myself.
Yeah. Well, this is the best I can do for beard growth. So.
Anyway, go back to what you were actually saying.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, that's cool. I had no idea that we had a person join. So, so I had this problem, which is that I really, really wanted genuine dialogue, and it turns out that that's incredibly rare in stage interviews. And there were some general rules that we could talk about that that the professionals beat into my head over the years, and I'd love to share those, if you're interested. But the idea I came up with was, you want the conversation to have a purpose, and you want that purpose to be so malleable that you can use it for any conversation, but that it operates as a guiding light, and the guiding light lets people forget to be, what's the right word, overly serious, uptight.
And that's the tricky balance about it, because you're saying we're going to go over there, but the path can't be so strict and narrow that we're tripping over ourselves as we try to walk in that direction generally. And
so the idea I came up with that I never got to try was, sorry, I looked at the chat. I do that.
One of the things we're going to have to learn is how do we actually work with this format. Welcome, Polar Knights. So glad to have someone here to let us test this out, because we were just expecting this would just be us talking to each other today.
Polar Knights is awesome, by the way. We should totally. This is great. So anyway, the idea was that an AI or something, that the purpose of the conversation is that the conversation is an open letter to a target. In other words, this conversation and everything we say will get summarized in some way, and a letter will go to Taylor Swift, or to
Just
or to
automatically.
That's not literally that we're going to send it to Taylor Swift. That's just a
No.
hypothetical.
Yes,
we could
this
send
is
one
a-
to Taylor Swift, but you're talking about this is basically an idea to.
It's a hypothetical, or it's a prompt.
Oh. Yeah, exactly.
It's a prompt for the conversation to begin.
So that's a really interesting sort of way of thinking about conversation. I described it earlier as your goal is not to think about targets, to think about who exactly are you talking to, and how do you come up with something to say to them. Where did Michael go?
Oh, looks like he got muted for a second and then he dropped out.
Oh.
But here he is. He's
Am I
back.
here?
Yes.
I
Yeah,
couldn't
he's
hear
just-
you. I couldn't hear you guys, so I was like gone.
Technical
So anyway,
bits.
that the idea was that way you could invite anybody. You could
Mhm.
you could have anybody anytime,
Mhm.
and you could even start it not knowing who the open letter is going to end up going to.
Mhm.
But that the idea is that at the end, an open letter will go to somebody.
I'm interested in that idea if you don't know who it's going to. So you have your
Interesting.
conversation, and then at the end you say, who should we send this to? Who do we
Like,
take
who
in
needs
the
to
things?
hear this?
Who needs
the
to
most?
hear this?
Who needs to hear this? Yeah. So I liked it because it psychologically, to me, it seemed like it would open up a lot of pathways.
Mhm.
Because you're not thinking, oh, I'm talking just to Polar Knights right now, or whoever's on the chat, or Trond. Like if Trond isn't interested in what I'm saying, that doesn't matter, right?
Right.
All that matters is the person that's going to get this at the end, right?
Right.
And what would be even cooler is if that person responded, right?
That would be a really interesting way to close the loop.
Yep.
That's very cool. So we've had a couple of other format ideas that we've talked about. So we talked about the sort of the invite people in with a counter or an extra guest kind of thing. We've talked about this type of thing where we're having a conversation to write something for someone. I'm quite interested in that. I also like that. Like there's some other groups and things I'm involved in where that actually might be a useful format for them to try. You had a couple other. Oh, go on.
Oh no, go ahead. Say it again.
I was just going to say. So Jay had some other conversation formats that he mentioned beforehand. I wonder if you can remember what they were.
I mean, one of them that I have enjoyed is a little bit more of a debate format. So kind of like Intelligence Squared. They often
I love
have
that stuff.
Really good episodes. And I don't know that we want to get quite so formalized, but just bring on people with known opposing perspectives on things.
Yeah. People who disagree to some extent. I like that. Another format that I would love to try and do, it is not the sort of thing that you do within a 1 hour podcast. It's definitely a thing that's a longer period, which is there is an organization down in the Bay Area called the Long Now Foundation, and they some years ago did a event called the Long Conversation, which was I think it was a 10-hour conversation broadcast thing, where what they did is they had a panel of they had I think 20 people, something like that, and they had one of them was the founder of the organization plus a guest. And then after 15 minutes, the founder dropped off and a different guest joined in. And then after 15 minutes, another guest dropped in. And they just did this rolling conversation. Yeah. And it was presented as a full day event.
Do they have to pick up on the last conversation, or is it like, okay, it cuts off and something entirely different, whatever the next person brings in? Or is this like
it was very open. People could choose to change the subject, or they could just roll on. And generally what happened, at least from my recollection of it, because it was about 10 years ago, they mostly just followed on. They mostly said, oh, so you're talking about this. Well, here's what I think about that. And then it would naturally evolve. It was very organic in the sense that they weren't following a particular plan. I loved it. It was really, really cool.
Well, both of I'm sorry. I'm going to sound like I only have one idea, but those are all really good for open letter design. Right? Opposing views, really long conversation. Like you're getting a vast quantity of content that then is going to get distilled down. I love that,
Yeah. So, Jay, did you have some other formats or structures that we talked about that you can remember?
I mean, so this is definitely not, I think, the intended endpoint for the podcast, but I do enjoy the kinds of situations that emerge when you have a sort of a game or some separate system or framework that is being used to facilitate behavior and discussion.
Interesting.
Most of my experience from that perspective is with GMing in D&D, but I feel like there might be some other examples of things we could invite some people on and do it specifically because it will be a really interesting group to have.
Wait, let me roll
like
to see who
one-offs.
talks next.
Yeah.
I want to tell you about a game called Symposium. It's sort of a role playing game. It's a game that's based on a different game called For the Queen, and they're fundamentally conversation games. I'm not going to try and explain the rules or anything too much right now, but the general idea is that in Symposium, imagine that you are a Greek who is interested in talking about stuff, and you're at a symposium. To be clear, by the symposium here, I mean the variety depicted in Plato's Dialogue Symposium, which is a drinking party. You get together, you hang out, you keep talking about interesting stuff until you're too drunk to continue. In fact, the game the game features a draw pile where you draw cards from it to determine what people are going to talk about, and there is a card that's randomly injected into that in the lower portion of the deck, which says you are too drunk to continue, which basically is what ends the game. But Symposium is basically if you play it in the formal sense, like you actually follow the rules. The idea is at the beginning of the game, you're going to be drawn. Sorry, you'll either draw or you will choose a card that defines a specific philosophical perspective, so hedonism or any number of sort of particular things. Platonism,
you have to kind of take that stance, and then
you have to take that sort of stance, and then as the game progresses, you're going to be drawing cards for a question, and you're going to spend a couple of minutes laying out your position on that thing with the expectation that you're thinking from that perspective. And it's intended not as a particularly competitive game that you could play it in a competitive way, but it's more we all talk. The rules facilitate making sure that we all have a chance to talk, and then they facilitate a means of us saying who we think said the coolest stuff at which point in time and track that to play forward. So that's an example of a conversation game you could totally play in a podcast format like this. And if we want to do that, let's get some philosophers involved, because I bet we can find some. I can think of three of
I definitely know that would team. I have several people in mind.
Well, I like I said, it's exciting when people decide to do something that's about open dialogue, and I'm really glad you guys are doing this. I just noticed that like I said, there's a whole list of things that like automatically failed whenever they tried them in the years that I did this for either Microsoft or otherwise. Oh, which brings up another point, which is you don't need a producer, but you do need somebody who's doing all the chat.
We talked a little about the idea of having someone participating whose job is really focusing on the chat, and then also I think it's often helpful in these sorts of things to have someone looking things up, because some deep conversations it's good to be able to pull material, not necessarily questioning people's facts, but more just providing context.
But they're just pulling research or they're just skimming as whatever the topic of discussion is at that point.
So I'm actually really curious how many people you could have participate on camera in one of these things before it becomes unwieldy. It seems like 3 is working pretty well. Right. I imagine that more than 5 is bad. 4 seems doable. 4 plus one person who's primarily chat. That could work.
It's possible. I've done 4 on an actual podcast episode a few times for Reality Quest, the one I've done previously with Kelly. I don't know, Michael, I don't know if you've met her yet, but we'll pull her on here at some point. I think that would be a fun group as well. But 4 changes the dynamic significantly from a 3-person group all of a sudden, because you've got 2 other guests that don't know each other initially, or maybe they do.
We did 8 years of panels, because one of the ways to pay off. Yeah, there's a moderator, and then we would try a panel of 2, a panel of 3, and a panel of 4. Yeah. And panels where you have 2 were consistently the highest scoring. 3 and 4 always scored the lowest. Now, the context was different, right? The context was global CIOs, and they're just generally afraid to say anything that would get them in legal trouble anyway. So people would basically just waste time. Yeah. So the idea is that if you couldn't share a genuine insight that people were desperate to hear, we didn't want you on a panel, so we would throw you on a panel of 4 or 5, because then at least something funny might happen.
Maybe.
Interesting. So
Right.
more humorous situations emerged from larger groups?
Yeah, basically the
Or that
best
was
you
the
could hope
theory?
for. And that was what I observed over 8
Okay.
years of panels twice a year.
Conference panels, I think, have a tendency to be a bit crap.
Mhm.
In large part because they always try and cram lots of people in. So they're trying to get 3 or 4 people on stage.
Mhm.
The schedule says they only got 20 minutes, which
Yep.
means they've got 1 or 2 minutes to talk about themselves at the beginning, and then there's just not that much time to get into the depths of anything.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I don't want to participate in those. I don't want us to produce those sorts of events. If we're going to have decent numbers of people, it needs to be because the extra people need to be in it because they're adding something to the conversation. So I like the idea. If we had, so I think from the ground up, we've got me, Jay and I want to be in it because we're the ones doing this thing. We want to participate, right? Then we want to have a person who's bringing a new perspective to participate, whatever that perspective is. So that's 3. Then we're interested in this idea of exploring a additional person who can bring a different perspective, like an oppositional perspective or a orthogonal perspective. So that's 4. And then if we're going beyond that, the only reason I could see why we would want to go beyond that would be if we were saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had a person focused on not collecting data, why do I say that? Doing the live conversation and looking for things online. That's what I mean.
Well, yes. But I have some caveats to your yeses. Caveat number 1 is if you were going to go with a game format like you described, or the very, very long conversation format, you can have more people. The other thing is there's a framework of some sort. Right. There's also a trick you mentioned before we started broadcasting from an old conference thing, where whoever's talking gets the focus plus the 2 hosts. Right. So then you can have more people, even if the other person doesn't appear for 70% of the time. As long as you don't have people who never say anything and they're just a face on the screen, that's the disaster. But you can have more people if it still is just 3 slots talking, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody can just chime in and go, oh, wait a minute. Lucy's got to wait.
Actually.
Well, leaning back to what Are You Serious Show did, they did that sort of thing where they had a person who was in most of the things, I think, but he didn't really say a lot. He mostly sort of weighed in when there was something to do with the production or something to do with information, and so he, the camera would shift to him, so to speak, and he'd talk for a bit, and then it would go back to whoever was there. And I think that works. I don't know if there's any automated stuff that we could do with streaming, but that sort of thing would be a cool trick.
Well, I have in front of me an A10 Mini Pro, right? And I've used it to integrate other sources. So like I could have somebody talking in my ears that you guys can't hear. And then I would hit a button and then my camera would be replaced by their feed, right? And I can have up to 4 feeds with an A10 Mini Pro, right? So I'm one guest, but I'm 4 people, right?
Polar Knights has a lovely backhanded compliment in there.
I'm really glad that it's actually been enjoyable so far for Polar Knights.
He seems to be enjoying
what did he say? What did he say?
He said it's nice to see. Oh, so if you haven't found it, there's a thing on the right that says comments that you can tab, so you can see the channel coming from Twitch. He said it's nice to see Jay respecting his elders and letting them talk all the time. Just so you know, all the 3 of us used to work together, so we have a certain level of he knows that we can't stop.
There's already rapport.
Yeah,
for all of
We've been there and done that.
That rapport thing's actually worth talking about, though, because that's another thing. One of the reasons I like involving more people is not just because it gives us more perspectives. That is great. That is a good reason to do it. But I also think that by having more people involved and by having people come back, even if they're not actually the interviewee, because I don't like the way in which a lot of podcasts are like the hosts who are there in every episode and the interviewee who is there once.
Yeah,
right?
it's always
I think I want that rotating cast of having it feel a bit more like a conversation in the living room with whoever happens to be there that weekend.
It's also interesting for the audience because they get to learn about somebody the first time, and if they did watch that as well and see them come back, then they have a reason to check it out again and they already have some context. It's like you have rapport with that person in a way.
Yeah, and I think it opens the door to live commenting as well, because there's more people to talk to, more people to have a thing with.
Yeah, you can see that they've kind of like drifted or changed in a little bit of a way compared to last time.
Well, yeah, and there's definitely a technical trick to it, right? To make it work right, because you don't want to do, the things that don't work, that we know don't work. But but I love the more perspectives you can get, and the more you can get return perspectives, like evolving perspectives, the more it feels like an ongoing dialogue.
Conversation exists in a context. You can't just have a conversation with a person and then never see them again and expect that to be really meaningful in the same way. You, for example, have no way to hear what they say, go away, sleep on it, think about it for a few days, in the shower, or whatever, come back and then say, oh, that thing you said the other day, I was thinking that blah, blah, blah. That's not possible if you do interviews.
Right. And I completely agree. Real dialogue requires the ability to come back. It's a cycle, right?
Yeah. It's a snapshot, not just if they only come on once, it's a snapshot. If they come on repeatedly, you see them change over time, then it becomes a little bit of a story.
Well, and the open letter thing again, I'm going back to it. It's like, well, they didn't listen. You know what I mean? So we got to send them another letter. It's like, what do they listen to this time? Why can't we get their attention?
Trying to send letters to Taylor Swift every time. Yeah.
She's gonna start wondering who these weirdos are.
You know what's weird is I think I only know 2 of her songs, so that's gonna be pretty bad.
I will admit that I don't know any of them. At least I probably know them on the radio, but I just don't know the names of them. I'd recognize them I'd recognize them as something I heard in the supermarket. It's just because my approach to listen to music primarily exists in finding random crap on Spotify or whatever.
I hope no Swifties ever find out about this, because we're
no. If you are a Swiftie and you think this sort of conversation and stuff is interesting, and you'd like to tell us all about Taylor Swift and why we should care, you can tell us and join us.
Yes.
The whole point is we want to hear from people we don't understand.
Right.
That sounds like a good segue, though, to talk a little bit about.
Please, no Swift, kill me now.
We'll see if we can find a way to inflict that on you. But let's talk about guests, because another one of the things about this that we discussed at the beginning that sort of drives it is the idea that interesting conversations do not have to be with famous people. A lot of podcasts tend to try and go off and find people who are famous, and they do it often by finding people who have books published, and then they get the come on. And that's great. Some of those people are interesting, but you know what I like doing more? I like hanging out with people who don't have a lot at stake and who are willing to have a conversation where they explore things. They don't have to worry about a public persona so much. So we sort of realize, most of the interesting conversations I have are with my friends, not with famous people. So why don't we have a podcast where we explore that a little bit more? So that's not to say that we're not interested in talking to famous people, but that there are an awful lot of interesting people that we know in the entrepreneurship community here in Seattle and our various other parts of our lives that we are interested in involving in. And that also opens the breadth of topics that we're interested in. So we're not, for example, here to do a talk only about technology or only about philosophy or whatever. We have we've gathered 60 or so people on the list that we have sort of looked at. So we've decided we would like to include and that we think would say yes, and 10 people who have actually said yes, something like that. So maybe let's just take a look at that list quickly, Jay, and just talk a little bit about some of the things conversations and topics that we might get out of that. And then, Michael, this might be interesting for you you may have some people you want to throw into the mix based on some of the ones that we throw out. And I will, I'm not going to
listen. Some interests and focus of discussion that might emerge from
we hear you now, yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Technical issues have occurred. Okay, they happen.
Yeah, your mic volume sounds a little bit different, but that's all good. We're going to pull up this list of people.
Sounds like what we're saying rings with Polar Knights there. He also doesn't like a famous person. My attitude is I don't like someone being famous is not enough for me to dislike them. However, when someone is famous, I sort of assume that the fame has the potential to have gotten to them. Right? Fame can get to people, and I don't.
It did not leave them unscathed.
Yeah. I'm actually going to make this simple, which is when people are famous, they've gotten used to being on shows.
Yes.
And they have a shtick.
Yep.
They very quickly fall into
there's a character.
And they had something to lose.
Yeah, and that's not a diss against them or anything like that. It's just, and some people, when they become famous, they don't fall into a shtick, right? Like, and they're amazing people, right? Now there's still things they won't talk about. It's like they're overly. It's like the more you do this kind of thing, the more conscious you get about what you can and cannot do when you do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that's why famous people can sometimes be really difficult to work with. Again, speaking from experience.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it comes back to trying to figure out how to break people out of this framework. If they have a character or persona, they're already used to that mode that they go into whenever they're on air or in front of a camera or a microphone. So it's all the problem of how do you break them back out of that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, I don't mind if someone's famous, but that's just not a criteria in my decision-making process for whether we should invite them. My criteria is, are they genuine? Are they interesting? Are they willing to have a conversation where, we go back and forth and maybe they change, maybe they learn something, maybe they change their opinion. If any of those three things is a problem for them, then maybe they're not the right person for this show.
But like famous people that I would like to talk to about any topic that they cared about.
Yeah.
Patton Oswalt, Weird Al Yankovic.
I'd love to have that. Would be amazing. Of course, the problem with that is we'd just be fanboys for like an hour.
Oh, I know.
If you can resist.
Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah, she has a very interesting demeanor.
She's just really well. Her whole shtick is, "I'm going to break your shtick," which is like great. You know what I mean? So it's really good.
There's a lot of people on our list who are somewhat famous in their particular domain, not famous in a sort of culture or on stage famous. Like for example, well, I'm not going to name. I don't name names now. There's people on this list here that if you are in the space that they are in, you definitely know who they are, and I think they would. I think those are people who would be fun because they're interesting people. But so let's. So I've got our little list here, and sorry, Michael, I can't really share this with you easily, but we're just going to maybe. Touch on a couple of topics and things that we have in our list here that I think are interesting to talk about. Like we get my table view up here. So obviously, given that the three of us all work in tech, Jay and I both work in tech. We do XR. There's tech people. There's a bunch of people who are sort of in the world of entrepreneurship because
a network.
seems that we're interested in that stuff. But we also have folks on our list who are. I'll just pick out a couple that I know are interesting. Jay, maybe you could start and tell us about the dive topic that you were talking about.
The dive. Oh yeah. So I'm a freediving instructor. I got into diving a couple years ago, first in Hawaii, then here in Seattle, and I started meeting a lot of people around here that are really deep in that community. Really good instructor. He just had a really interesting personality and philosophy on things. I thought it'd be really interesting to bring him on as a guest and talk because he's just someone that's completely outside of my normal circles. Which is why it was so refreshing to be part of that community.
I really love the idea of bringing in people who are simply not insiders in these things that we are insiders in and seeing how they react to some of the things that we assume are correct. Because there's a lot of assumptions that get made in our space.
One of my favorite, the person I did all my early interviews with when I was testing my podcast, which was called The Wrong Show. Was Larry Strikeman, who was a very high-level producer for CBS and then for Hallmark Entertainment for many years. And he did like Lonesome Dove and, just so many things. He's much older now, and he has zero fear of saying what he thinks, right? And he has amazing stories to share, but he has an insider's view of how something is made, like how the sausage is made, that kind of thing. And it also is really fun to talk to about, like, for instance, how AI works. Because he and his friends will have assumptions about how ChatGPT, they'll think it's really funny that ChatGPT basically did X. And then I'll say, well, actually, it did it because this, and this. And they'll go, well, now it's even more interesting. So
So yeah, so there's sort of different types of life experiences. I think one of the so we have our list of people, and one of the categories we have in this is people that we think we should invite simply because they do something weird and interesting. And so Jay's freediving instructors on that list. I think we had a couple other people. Actually, we haven't got many other people on that list. Oh, we've got a few.
I mean, a good friend of mine from high school, whole life, he was in the Air Force for a while and then ended up studying film and became a film producer and DP, a director of photography, and he works in New York now. He's completely outside of this community, but he's got quite a interesting personality. He's good to talk to, and that's another type of person I would love to pull into this environment, just because it's totally different perspective.
I would love to get someone to get to a point. I'd like to get a magician on here at some point. I would love to have a conversation with a magician.
Oh, I have contacts.
Does anyone know David Blaine?
I have contacts at the Magic Castle in Los Angeles.
You do?
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, next year, when one of us has money again, let's go to LA and go to the Magic Castle. I've always wanted to do that.
Well, a guy who used to work for me named Jim Danksel, who at one point in time was the world's third best Quake player.
Wow.
Yeah. If you ever want to see a famous battle, look up Thresh versus Date Reptile. D the number 8 Reptile. And there's a famous YouTube battle about them fighting it out, and he had just reached like Zen-like status, and
good for him.
But he's a professional magician, and whenever I'm in LA, I try to look him up, and he just gets me into the Magic Castle. It's really awesome just seeing all those magicians. So we could get people, no problem. I got contacts, man. I got contacts.
Yeah, well, that sounds. I mean, that'd
be really good.
One of the things when I explain this to people who are in my life, like family members, for example, about, hey, there's this project I'm doing, people for whom I might need to justify how I'm spending my time. Because I'm a person who always wants to do a new project. And so they're kind of used to me saying, hey, I want to do this thing. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. That's nice, dear. And I'll just leave it at that. But when I try to explain why I think this is a thing that can be successful, is we had some conversations early on about what do we need for this to be, what's our goal here? Is our goal to build an audience and become famous podcasters, or to build a thing that's not really, no. If we could get this to the point that we are every week or two having a cool conversation with an interesting person, that's a win. That's right there. That is a sustainable win. If we can do that, and if there happen to be people who are interested in this and listening to this and participating in it, cool. That's great. But that's not the requirement. It's not the requirement. I'd love, to be clear, I would love us to build an audience. I think it's entirely plausible, but I don't think that's a necessary aspect of success.
It's not the metric for winning at this podcast game.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of my best friends and colleagues over the past several years came from the previous podcast that Kelly and I had done. So
okay.
It was a really good experience from that perspective. And those kinds of connections still happen, but I really like the idea of having a medium where some of those discussions can still be captured, or at least given a platform of some sort.
So there's a topic that is important to cover before we move on, which is how to deal with duds. Anytime something is worth doing, it means sometimes you're going to push the envelope and do something that you feel uncomfortable with. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing, because it means you're pushing the envelope and you're trying things, but you still need to deal with them. And so it's worth having a brief conversation. What do you guys think you're going to do?
Do you have a thought, Jay? Otherwise,
did I just make you uncomfortable? Is that a dud moment? That's good to know.
Not really.
We've turned.
I can tell you how to make me uncomfortable. If you get on and you start trying to sell me on something, I will get uncomfortable and I'll change the subject.
Yeah.
But that's just because I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, if you're like really fanboying hard over a particular thing or a perspective, I will feel more motivated to try to push back on it.
Well, it's helpful to know we could role play it or whatever, but every good sort of interviewer, dialoguer group knows how to deal with, what they call dead air, right? Back in the radio days, but now they give it different names. But it's because you're really not enthusiastic about having this conversation anymore, and yet it just started.
I think one of the things that allows us, because we're allowing ourselves to not stick to the topic,
right?
It is easy for us to move on. If something's just difficult, we can just move on, and that's
like
fine.
The theme won't be so strict. Like, oh well, we got to really stay on this thread, but we got to turn it over somehow.
And then the other thing is, by having a few more people in the conversation, if one person's uncomfortable, that's fine. We can talk to the other person. So there's a little bit more flexibility there, but that's definitely. I think this can be a thing we're going to have to learn a little bit from experience.
It's a valid concern. I don't know exactly how we would address it ahead of time, other than just going through this process and experimenting.
I actually want us to have uncomfortable conversations to some extent.
Well,
and let me be uncomfortable, like this is inappropriate. But I mean, I want us to talk about ethics. I want us to talk about things where people might not agree, and I want people to be comfortable. I want us probably. So there's an aspect here which we do need to have, which is a sort of a code of conduct for how we.
Well, a code of conduct. Sorry,
a code of conduct for how we're talking, just for how do we manage it if things get heated? How do we sort of encourage people to sit back and think before they respond? That sort of stuff. But
right. And so there's some rules, right, that are actually part of the industry.
Right.
That like, for instance, one of you can never lose your cool. Right.
So we just don't have that luxury to get so sucked into the conversational.
Right. There's lots of different rules, right, that you can use. But the trick is that as hosts, you never want to be labeled as just having that one perspective that you had when you got angry that one time.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it affects your brand or you care about views or any of that crap. It's because it inhibits your ability to have future good dialogue. That's all. That's the only reason why you care.
Yeah, and it's a really strong lens on everything that you do after.
That's right.
Yep.
And so the trick is it's got to be practiced. Unfortunately, right? You don't just have it.
Yep.
Although Tron, you're very good at de-escalation. I know from experience. Jay, you're just not somebody who goes hardcore. But if you want,
I don't really get heated in that way. I can get very enthusiastic, but
I know that
I'm more worried about enthusiasm than I am anger. A lot more worried about enthusiasm.
but I know that I'm somebody who gets heated, right? And I say things that I regret, and then I lose my ability to have good conversations in the future. So.
Actually, this is an interesting question. I would love to dig into a little bit more, because I think we all have been part of rather intense engagements, and I can remember some very specific ones where we intentionally brought together the conflicting parties and tried to resolve it real time. Michael, what is what is the most effective for you method that someone else has used or can use to help you come down when you get really into something or really dragged into
so it's classic. It's from the classic de-escalation rulebook, which is you name it. You don't attack me, right? You don't say I'm wrong or right. You say, hey, let's do a pause. We're pretty heated here. Are we accomplishing our goals? Where are we going here? Right?
Yeah, like the thing we were talking about.
Right.
Not you, Michael.
No, not you.
This thing.
Right. That's usually, but when you have a show, you have a standard way to do that, right? It's not like new every time. It's a standard way to do that.
I like that because that is an example of a using a specific question or request to step back, right? You by saying let's name our goals, you're basically taking a step back and giving yourself a chance to, like, regardless of what you're actually asking, are you actually asking about goals or are you asking about something else? You are giving everyone a chance to take a breath and reflect very briefly on what's going on, and that often gives people a chance to do things, to sort of let something go or work out what's going on.
And it's specific to your format. So, like, if you're doing the letter format, you'd be like, well, are we arguing about what's going in the letter now? Or is this are we how would
it certainly allows you to move away from the idea that the reason we're arguing is because I hate this person and I want to make them look like crap, right? That's not, if anyone gets on, there's always this sort of Well, if you ever get to that point, then maybe you should just end the episode at that point.
Well, no, because like I watch for this. Like I'll watch Anderson Cooper. I'll watch Bill Maher. Bill Maher is great to watch because he purposely brings people on who are going to piss him off, right? And he wants to get angry, but he's the host, right? And so he has to like you know.
I'm just too nice for that sort of thing.
No, I know, but but Anderson Cooper has to do it, and all of them, and I don't watch a lot of TV news, but my wife does, and so I'm coming in and out of the room, and anytime it gets intense, I go, how much of this is the fault of the moderator? How much of this is the skill of the moderator, and how much of this is the fault of the format, right? And so I think about
sorry, Paul and I just said I remind him of Ming the Merciless, and I'm going to take that. I'm happy with that comparison. It's my giant forehead.
What plaything do you have for me today?
I need a Ming the Merciless costume. That's what I need.
So anyway, sorry, I went off on that, but
it's a really good.
I think a lot about it. So
but that's an important thing. It is an important thing. I think we're going to learn a lot of this through experimentation, and I think that kind of keeps with the ethos of what we're trying to do here, which is to experiment. But yeah,
there were a lot of situations like this when I was in the military, where we're in some sort of training school, and there's a whole platoon of us that are sick of dealing with one another and are drill sergeants and instructors. And everybody's really exhausted, so it's a great environment to have lots of really heated conflicts while you're all just sitting outside the classroom.
Yeah.
And it's the hurry up and wait situation. So like every day we'd end up getting into some sort of debate between people from opposite sides of the country that have completely different backgrounds. One person's from the middle of Shenandoah in Virginia out in the country, and the other's from like downtown New York or Los Angeles, somewhere else very cosmopolitan, and they have totally different perspectives.
That's right.
And I feel like I often ended up in that situation where I was either debating with somebody about a thing, like trying to tease out where their reasoning or rationale comes from. Like I wanted to understand the roots, or I was trying to kind of moderate and de-escalate a conflict between two other people. Or even sometimes you'd have one person that's just really, they are dead set on holding their ground against an entire group of other people, and they're really stubborn about it. But the thing that you mentioned,
that's the position I'm always in.
Yeah.
You stubborn? What?
Yeah, I'm an obnoxious little bastard. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean, I won't say it in public, but yeah. So going rolling back a bit, we were talking about possible topics and things for this, and there's plenty of other topics, other people with interesting topics on our list here. But I wonder a good question might be, Jay, if you could think of a type of person or a type of perspective that you could have in this that we don't have on the list already, what do you think would be? Who would be really, really cool? Or Michael, I'll ask you that question as well. Though you don't know who's already on our list. Maybe the famous person you can suggest is already on our list.
It'd be fun to just see if I can name people that are on your list.
Oh, it would be a good guessing game. I mean, basically, if I know them and they're interesting.
If I can name names that are on your list, you have to take a shot.
My drink is empty and it's water.
Yeah, I know.
I was thinking in the car about whether or not I will have a drink with these in future, because it does seem like it might be fun, but it might also be awful.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both.
I look at Graham Norton's talk show. He does interviews with things, and they use the small amount of alcohol to great effect. Oh yeah, no, and that show is brilliantly orchestrated. I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
Very well done.
Kind of like it's a similar idea as Hot Ones. Have you seen that?
Yeah, it's a similar sort of thing. Yeah.
You bring somebody on that you normally wouldn't see in this kind of context, and then you have them eat incredibly spicy food.
Do you know the secret? Do you know the secret to Graham Norton's show?
I haven't seen it.
So Graham Norton got started, and the reason why the show existed is because there were reasons why a lot of famous people would be in England for a day or two. And there was no standard show where they would just all show up. So Graham Norton's show exists to be the place where famous people who
Right.
happen to be in town stop off. That's
Yeah.
it. Like that. That's
Like,
the
if
show.
you're
Yeah,
gonna
I
be
mean, that
in
makes
the,
sense.
if you're gonna be
Yeah.
in the UK, you might as well stop by
Right.
Graham.
And because it's in the UK, people are way more relaxed about it because it's a tiny market. Like, everybody's just like, yeah, whatever, although that's probably going to end because of the internet age, because now we see it all, like we all know who Graham Norton is, and none of us live in England, so.
I do like the sort of the way in which his thing feels like a bunch of people on a couch having a conversation. I mean, functionally it is that they do that on purpose, right? But I like the way that it really feels like that. Unlike most talk shows here, where it feels a bit different. I don't have a good answer to exactly what's different about it. It doesn't feel quite right.
The key is the little cards that the Graham Norton's people give him, right? Because he's sitting there, he's leaning back, and he's like, "Oh, Orlando Bloom, you're a whistler. What does
Right.
that mean?" You know what I mean? It's like they do all of this research, and the writers for it have this way of honing in on curiosities, things that have a story to them that will get people telling the story. But they'll queue up video clips and all sorts of things. Like they'll have everything ready so that Graham Norton can just like look like he's just making it up on the spot.
He's just
Yeah. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it.
Yeah.
So Jay, did you have any thoughts on a topic? Topic?
I had a tangential thought based on this last little thing we were talking about, not a particular person yet, but one of the episodes that we had a really good experience with the Reality Quest was where we actually had our guest dress up in his favorite pajamas. And then come in, and we all sat in different corners of the shared room. So it wasn't remote, but we were all in pajamas on really comfy beanbags in different corners of the room. And it just turned out to be the most relaxed conversation and the most prolonged one I'd had with this person. And I'd known him for at least a year at that point already.
I like it. I like the use of a
modality.
Dressing. I mean, it's set dressing or those sorts of things. Context. Yeah.
You're like, right, what am I, like? I'll dress up in a way that is going to make this a much cozier and more casual and relaxed.
Similarly, if we said everyone wears a suit and you all have a glass of whiskey, it would be a very different conversation.
Yeah, it would be a certain vibe.
Or just costumes only.
Yeah. So I think that's something we should keep in mind when we're trying.
Do you want to throw a card for that on the? I just want to throw it.
You're using a board.
We are. So just anyone who didn't know, we do project management. We of course have a Trello board and other such things at Notion's DB.
Yeah, I'll drop that. Oh yeah, pajama party.
There we go.
Pajama party, Halloween costumes, different dress. I guess prompts before you start the conversation. Everybody has to be in the most comfy spot in their house that they can find and have a particular type of drink, or you're wearing pajamas, or you've got a dinosaur costume on. It's just another thing to kind of.
My wife would be keen if we do dinosaur costumes because she will take any opportunity to dress up in her inflatable T-Rex outfit.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I did try a format thing that I think has become antiquated now, but I'm going to just mention it. Because I'm not sure that it's antiquated. Where again, using the ATEM system, I could be playing a video game, broadcasting it, but I could put my face anywhere or be full screen face. And the video game was chosen to be particularly relaxing. The one I chose was Elite Dangerous. Space, and you're flying around and you got your ship, and really nothing happens most of the time, right?
You're just drifting.
We have a person on my list who is I will say he lives inside Elite Dangerous, who I'd love to include in the conversation because I think his background and experience was very interesting.
Well, and I'm a huge fan of that video on YouTube that goes into how the original Elite was written. For a system that, I mean, full 3D.
It's amazing.
I mean, they pushed that technology to the absolute limit in order to be able to make that game exist. So,
It runs on Commodore 64. It simulates like a couple of thousand planets or systems in a galaxy
then you
on a
have to
Commodore
watch the
64
video.
with 64 kilobytes of memory.
Yeah.
It's jaw-dropping how good it is.
Yeah, you have to watch this video, Tron. You will love it. You will.
I think
love
I'm aware of it, and I put it on a thing. I just put a thing on my task list to
Oh
go
my
find
God.
it and launch it
It
again.
is so worth it. Oh. The other thing that we should talk about sometimes is anime, Tron, because
Okay.
I recently got signed copies of some voice actors from New York. Again, I came from New York because I visited my family in New York, and my sister works at NBC, so sometimes she has access to famous people. And I got the voice actors for Naruto and Shikamaru to sign stuff for me. So
Nice.
the English version, not the Japanese version, but
Nice.
not
Bridget's very interested in the whole world of voice actors because, of course, she was always wanted to be a voice actor. In fact, she is a voice actor. She just doesn't do anime voice acting, even though she'd really, really like to. She mostly does instructional videos for Microsoft.
I would like to have open letters to voice actors to try to convince them not to do the super, super loud and then super, super for the entire performance.
I know what you're talking about, and I also would like that. I actually don't, in general, watch English voice actors doing anime because, for me, it's really challenging because, to me, anime is fundamentally Japanese in character and culture, and watching an American voice on top of it's like I'm watching two alien cultures clashing. It's weird. Hearing an American accent in a show set in New York, of course that makes sense. But hearing an American accent in a show that's clearly set in a Japanese high school, that's just weird. So I can't watch that stuff.
And because I've been watching so much linguistic stuff for the last 6 years, it's totally changed how I read subtitles completely. Because now I'm like, no, that phrase doesn't exist. And no, wait, that's not. And I don't actually speak Japanese, but I know that translation's wrong. You know what I mean? Like they just got lazy there, and that kind of stuff. So.
Polar Knights just said something about old text games on the VIC-20, and that just made me think of a type of person that I would love to have participate in this at some point in the future is someone who writes text adventure games, because my experience with reading blogs published by those people is they're all really interesting. Often in terms of the way in which they think about, they often tend to have a very strong handle on deconstructing plot and how do you pull it apart so that the game is interesting at every through every passageway that you follow through it. So I'd love to have some people who talk on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, the choose your own adventure concepts, they have whole new platforms now.
There's so much evolving in that space. It used to be there's lots of cool things.
Okay, just so you know, Trond, for me, your video froze for a second.
Yeah. You all both froze for me for a second, so I don't know if it was yours or...
Who knows? We're going to have to deal with that, I think. It's just the game.
Polar Knights.
Yes, you do sound like SpongeBob sometimes.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I'm not proud of my voice. I always wanted a radio voice. I always wanted the deep voice.
You would like a late night radio DJ.
Yeah. I always wanted to be that, but I'm not. I'm more nasally. I'm pretty much SpongeBob. I get it.
I think Jay's got the best voice for a late night radio DJ.
Yeah, he does.
Do the late night radio sound, and you just get a little close to the mic here, and you get the right effect.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly it.
What I need to do, before I'm ever in an episode, I have to go smoke 2 cigars, and then be around something I'm allergic to, and then come back in and be like, "I am Michael,"
Yeah. I just need to talk continuously for about 4 hours, so I almost lose my voice, and then I can do it.
Then it gets good.
Yeah,
have you actually seen the voice actor who does the SpongeBob voice? He literally shakes.
Oh, really?
What's it? The sound when he laughs. He's literally moving his throat.
Yeah. Okay.
Thing. It's obnoxious.
I used to know all those tricks, like my name is Michael, all that kind of stuff, and change it and hold it.
Yep, I love it. I'm gonna pivot to a slightly more serious conversation topic. We're still talking about things topics to conclude here. We talked earlier about what things that we're not going to include. One thing that you had on your standard list of 4 things, which was what? Sex, politics.
That's religion, politics, and selling.
Selling definitely no. It's just not fun. It's just not interesting. Sex only if it's interesting. Ethics and politics and religion, however, I really want to talk about those things.
Yeah, I think we need to.
I've already gotten a yes, I'll do it from a friend of mine who He is, I think, actually currently studying to become a counselor, but for a very long time was a prison priest. And I'm really interested in having a conversation with him about that, and then also anything else, because this guy also happens to be an improv comedian. So he's just a really fun person to
Yeah, I thought we could have a really good debate about whether or not Seattle's unique cultural icon of bikini baristas is still a good idea.
I don't think it was ever a good idea, but it's still funny.
Does Seattle own that?
Was brand? You can't find a bikini barista in any other major city that I'm aware of.
I thought those were from like Portland area and Oregon.
Oh, I mean, I'm happy to blame Portland.
Yeah, no,
I'm happy to blame Portland.
Okay. I don't consider Portland a major city, so we should have clarified that from the beginning.
I think you've just offended a small number of people. I definitely do see them a lot in the smaller satellite towns around Seattle. Like there's outside, like Monroe, just around the city. And Seattle downtown is probably not safe.
There's enough trees that you can't see more than a few hundred feet.
Well, what I meant was I had friends from Los Angeles come up, and I told them about this concept, and they were blown away. They were like, "Wait, what?" Like, and I was like, "Yeah,
I don't fully understand why it's a thing that.
All I know is that it's funny.
Yeah,
but I think it would be cool to have a bikini barista person come on, or an advocate or something, and somebody who's trying.
If we're going to talk about sex, that would be the sort of thing I'd like to talk about.
Right. Because everybody wants to ban them or something. You always see these articles, and then I would be like, "That's a fun discussion."
That would be a really fun contrarian opinion.
Right. And it would get out of hand.
It would be interesting. I think if we're going to get into those things, that's the sort of space where you really want to start thinking about your gender diversity in your group. So we want to definitely be doing that. But
we're the wrong set.
It's not that we're the wrong set. It's just our opinion on this matter is likely aligned in a particular direction, and therefore unlikely to consider alternatives. But I think that I think we know some very.
No, the baristas are not unionized. No.
No.
I mean, I can't imagine they are. That would be a really interesting union.
So another weird or unusual to me employment position in Oregon still is gas pump.
Oh my God, the gas pumps! It's so insane.
Well, New Jersey, it's illegal to pump your own gas.
It's illegal to pump your own gas.
It's illegal to pump your own gas in New Jersey.
Apparently illegal in Oregon as well.
I think it is in Oregon too. Yeah. But what I had heard is that the legislation was passed specifically to save that job.
Yep, that's what happened in New Jersey too, to save the job.
You could do something that is sort of monetary or mathematically equivalent, which is to say, we're going to tax all drivers, 10 cents per gallon or something like that, and we're going to put that money into a fund, and then we're going to use that money to hire 1,000 people to move soil from that pile to that pile and back again continuously, and that would be financially the same as what they have done with this.
Right. That's right. That's
it's one of those things where the economist is just right. It is stupid, but
Well, but at least you get to talk to the person in New Jersey. They come up like, "Hey, Michael, how's it going?" Blah blah blah.
Yeah, but I don't usually want to have a conversation when I'm filling my car. I'm usually like, my car is not full. I want to please done and go home.
Yeah, I know. Well, and what's really crazy is you have to wait for them to finish with somebody else.
Yep.
So, right. Yeah. Like if they're short staffed that day, you're just sitting there.
Like
I like unions in general. I like the idea of unions. I like the idea of workers being able to collectivize such that they can actually negotiate on an even table with their employers. I want that to exist. But I also get frustrated with the sorts of things that unions have historically done to sort of reinforce their position by just basically forcing legislation of stupid sort of rapids that make everything slow. So another good example of this is, I have no idea if this is still true, but I was told back in the day that at Gen Con, we could not use the service elevators because we're not members of the union. If we wanted to use a service elevator, we had to call someone who'd come and press the buttons for us. I don't know if that's actually true anymore, but I certainly have heard of that sort of thing in other places. And there's other sorts of...
It's silly things to protect jobs.
It's silly things to protect jobs, yeah. And there's a bunch of other things. And there are some great economics podcasts out there that talk about that sort of thing, and similar sorts of things. Like there's a lot of weird certification requirements for jobs that don't actually require intensive training, but they've managed to get mandatory. You must sign up for a special certification to become a cosmetologist with this organization here in order to sell makeup, and
Mhm.
it's
I
like
mean, it's
okay.
kind of analogous to trying to take extreme leaps to save a vestigial organ like an appendix that is having serious problems. But okay, we got to save it
Right.
because it
Right.
still exists, still needs representation. We need to preserve this outdated and no longer needed piece of the economy or the job market.
Yeah. So that would be an interesting type of topic as well. That would be a real contentious topic.
Well, and again, that's a topic where it really helps to have an outcome of some kind, not a big. I mean, a symbolic outcome of some kind, because otherwise, you end up arguing things that have been argued 100 times, right? And then there's no pressure to try to find a path forward, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, anybody who's worked in government long enough knows that sometimes you just have to save the jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So just to continue this thing about unions, but also rolling back a little bit to our previous topic, which is whether or not sex should be a thing that we talk about. So in New Zealand, prostitution is legal in New Zealand. It's not just decriminalised; it is fully legal. And sex workers in New Zealand, there is an organisation that is semi-union-like that exists pretty much to do the same kinds of union things for sex workers. And I would love to hear a little bit more about how that actually works.
Yep,
I think that would be a really interesting.
That would be really
again challenging.
And the Stranger, the Seattle magazine, has a writer. I'm forgetting his name, but he covers the sex industry in Seattle. I think he's famous for having picked arguments with some famous politicians over the years. Because he writes for the Stranger, but he has a name that also has a But anyway, he's a great representative to bring to the table. Anytime you want to talk about a place where it's been legal and they have a union, and a place where they have no representation, right? Because they are fully illegal, right? Like, it's illegal.
And I'll freely say I have no real understanding of how those industries work, but I've certainly listened to lots of people arguing that it is 100% wrong. No one should ever be able to this. But I've also listened to talks by people saying, actually, all of the methods that we use to forbid this sort of thing actually make things worse. So therefore, we should do this. There's a good TED talk by a woman from, I think, that organization that covers that topic. Nick Kristof he's a New York Times columnist, has a lovely section in his book Half the Sky, which makes strongly the argument that sure, it is better for the individual sex workers to have these things unionized or to have these things more legal so that they can do it. But there are a lot of dehumanizing effects that affect all the other people who get sucked in that make it not a good idea. And so there's a lot of, it's clearly a hard issue, clearly an issue I know very little about, but would be
also. It's also
and really my point is not that we should do this topic because it's one of many topics. It's more I think those sorts of things. That's an example of what it would look like for us to say, hey, let's include a topic that is related to sex.
Well, and then our tone would your tone would have to be different because it's not like I'm an expert or I'm trying to learn how to do this, right? It's tell me why is this not simple again? You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah. Like I want to understand and tease apart why this is a tricky thing, and it's not a straightforward legislative change. I think
the way I would phrase this
is that has a lot of expertise or just familiarity with the domain to talk to.
The way I'd phrase it is I have listened to talks by people arguing this position and come away feeling completely convinced. And I've listened to talks by people arguing this position and I've come away being completely convinced. And those two positions are mutually exclusive. So what am I getting wrong?
Exactly. That's a good point. That's a good way to put it.
That's true for a lot of positions. I'm very easily swayed.
No, well, but because they have a good argument, right?
Yeah.
But the whole picture is too hard. Political issues like affordable housing, but also science issues like reproducibility. Results, reproduction, and
more down to earth things. Like I would love to talk to a person who, for example, is a barista. I've never been a barista, but I am interested in how exactly someone who's experienced who does this, not just as a person who's doing anything, but like how do you actually manage this role? What weird shit happens? What are the things that are hard about this?
I feel like there's a lot of people I've run into in Seattle in particular, just because we have such a coffee culture here, and in some places baristas do not make enough money to live off. But there do seem to be a class of baristas here that have made it a career path. I'm really curious, like, what does that lifestyle look like? How did they get into that track and like really just find, a satisfying way to live and be a barista in a place like here or in places in Japan where you can do that?
Yeah, how do you live for this? There's a lot of interesting questions related to all of those sorts of things. Going back to the original point then, which was that, we don't need to talk to famous people to have lots of good conversations. There's clearly a lot of interesting conversations that can be had with just people who have interesting experiences and interesting backgrounds and interesting problems that we would be interested in talking to. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do here. I'm speaking in a slightly summative way here because we are getting to 20 to 5 and that was sort of getting too close to our end time. I need to go pick up a small person from... No, hang on. I'm not picking up a small person. No, Bridget's picking up a small person. I need to get home because I have a meeting at 6. But that gives me a little more time than I thought.
Well, that's all right. I like the idea of how do we wind it up. What I don't like is when people just go, "Well, that's all the time we have."
Well, that's all the time. Bye. I will steal an idea.
No, the comedian because he knows his girlfriend wants to stop talking to him because she'll go, anyway,
I usually mean that to say, okay, we've gone far enough down this rat hole. Let's get back to what we're meant to be doing. That's when I say that.
Back a little bit.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I want to one idea that I think would be an interesting thing to steal is one of my favorite podcasts is Rationally Speaking. It was done by the New York Skeptic Society. It is actually no longer producing things. They stopped about 2 or 3 years ago. The main host, I think, decided to stop doing a bunch of public things. But anyway, it's a fantastic podcast. It talks a lot about science and ethics and philosophy. They, for the first 5 or 6 years, the co-founder, co-host of it is a professor of philosophy, and so he knows his stuff. And their conversations get really deep. The other host, Julie Galef, she's I don't exactly know how to describe her, but she's a consultant who teaches people about rationality and how to think clearly about things. And she's an author and does a lot of cool things. So their topics are very incisive and very, very interesting. Anyway, they have a thing that they would include in their podcasts, which was at the end of every episode. They do something called the Rationally Speaking picks, which was that they would invite the people who their guests to tell them about a book that they had read or a thing that they had seen on YouTube or something that they thought they could recommend. And I really like that as a rounding off thing because it gives you something to go and check out. If you like this person's perspective, something to go check out. But it also would give them a little bit of time to react to the fact that things had ended and maybe say a last few things and then sign off in a clean way. There's probably other ideas like that, but I like that one. Yeah.
So Trond already knows this, but Jay, have you seen Evil Fucking Wizard, the video?
No. This is on
YouTube. You gotta hear this song. It's amazing. Yeah. Excuse my language.
You can use bad language. I don't have a problem with language.
We're now a PG podcast. But
we were always going to be PG podcast because I'm from New Zealand.
Actually, I think we went PG when we talked about bikini baristas. So I think.
Yeah.
But
I would have trouble editing any swear words out of my language because
evil fucking wizard is pretty good.
Okay. So is that your recommendation?
I'm behaving as though I were a guest.
Okay, sounds good. I mean, in a sense, you are technically the guest for this one because that was the thing. But the reality is we're
doing a very good job of behaving like a guest.
Well, our assumption was that we're probably going to end up having you back as an interlocutor at least a few times in the future anyway. So expect to be invited to participate many more times in future.
And I like the idea that you don't have to have somebody who's an expert in something to have a conversation about it. Yeah. So sometimes you can have an episode that's like, hey, we're just going to tackle this and do some research ahead of time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
A brilliant way to go.
Yeah, I think it's fun. I want to recommend a book I just finished because it was extremely cool and extremely nerdy. It is quite nerdy. It's a book called The Biggest Ideas in the Universe by Sean Carroll, who's he's got I have to look it up, but he has an interesting chair in physics at Caltech. He's an extremely famous science communicator. The whole premise of the book is I ought to be able to explain general relativity to an intelligent layperson, including the math. They don't need to solve the equations, but they ought to be able to understand what these equations mean and where they came from. Yeah. And so it basically does that.
Yeah.
And I read it, and I can tell you that if you understand a reasonable amount of math, this is a fantastic book if that subject is interesting to you.
Sorry. There's a topic that I love, which is, and Tron knows this. Actually, Jay, you both already know this about me. I love math, but I don't always get it.
Yep.
And so I like sessions where I get to be, no, I still don't get it. Why? What is a derivative again?
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
I have to remind myself of most
I
math
think we're in a
concepts if
similar-
you're trying to touch on them.
I think we're in a similar stance there in that I find mathematical concepts and theory fascinating,
Right.
but I do not necessarily have I've just never had the sort of aptitude to actually jump in and work through the equations as a person. It just, I don't
It's
know,
the
I was
same
never
thing
able
as
to stick.
bringing somebody on who's amazed by AI, but is never going to understand how it works, and then explaining it to them. It's like we could have Tron basically be our math teacher for a session. You know what I mean?
I can certainly get you up to the end of high school.
Or, yeah.
And then I can explain a lot, but it's been a while since I had to use the chain rule.
But we also know some of the world's best math teachers.
Yes.
So we could bring somebody on and be like, nope, we don't get it still. Nope, don't get it. Help me.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a friend who did a PhD in fluid dynamics, which would be really interesting to dig into because that's like fundamental, entropy of the universe.
Well, and I have a friend who studies the quantum level state changes in body chemistry.
Oh yeah, cool. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that sort of stuff that we're learning just now. That's very current. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to move my hand, so there's a synapse that has to fire. But at a quantum level, what's happening?
Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot that's going on. There's a lot of quantum effects, for example, in the specifics of how metabolism works. Right. We know the chemical reaction, but to get the energy states into such a place that this chemical reaction actually occurs at the speed that we see in the body, there's a lot of stuff we don't fully understand. As a non-educated person on that subject, understand it.
Well, and he's published papers, and his day job is he's a radiologist, right? He just looks at X-rays all the time. But his real passion is he's always trying to figure out how to move these experiments forward. So it's really cool.
Cool. Jay, you're the last person who hasn't given a recommendation. Have you read something cool that you want to tell us about?
Well, I was actually asked by Polar Knights what a good beanie brand.
I love it. I love it.
What?
This thing he's wearing.
This hat that I'm wearing right now. The one that I have on right now is pretty good. I found it, but
Wait, are you selling?
I'm not selling. I'm not. This was specifically by request.
I think that's okay. We'll allow it.
I'll allow it.
Saying that, I would also like to get some people in a judicial context, and just as a random thought. Go back. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think Patagonia's beanies are actually pretty solid quality, I think, as well. But this is a Vulcan beanie. It's just one of the smaller ones that actually doesn't cover your ears, which I liked. So you can
very important.
It's not so hot or not so cold.
I think it's been really interesting having Polar Knights join us. We were totally not expecting anyone to notice this and hop in because, honestly, it's just three dudes having a conversation. But having someone listen and through various remarks, it has been interesting because one of the things I have learned, is that we learn a lot from someone else reacting to what we're saying and also calling us on, I'm talking too much, maybe let Jay talk for a bit. That sort of thing is useful information, even if it's sort of given in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way. Another thing that's interesting to learn is...
if it's given in a tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah. Another thing that's interesting to learn, though, is that I tend to take everything at face value. So if someone says something, I will assume that what they mean it literally. But of course, on Twitch, the things that people say are often complete nonsense that they're saying because it's funny. And so this is a good reminder that we actually need to plan about how do we interact with people on this. We're learning that. Another thing that's helped us, I think, helped me at least understand is we really need to work out how we're signed into this. So it's not just me posting from precisely anything. We should have some identities for at least the regulars on the show for that. So Polar Knights, thanks for joining in. This has been an interesting activity.
It was a really nice surprise. Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't get practice in this sort of format with live people if we did.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, I mean, even if Polar Knights turns out to have been a bot.
Musketeers of Science.
Okay. I can put together a costume for that.
D'Artagnan.
I can wave a whatchamacallit, a rapier around in a fancy way that has nothing to do with actually being good with it.
All right.
So anything else we need to do to wrap up here? Jay, can you think of anything?
If you were doing the letter format, you would Jay, because he speaks the least, would summarize what's going to happen.
Okay, Jay, let's do that. You tell us what's happening.
What we need to decide, I think, is who this conversational summary would actually be sent to. Like who, based on everything we just talked about, if we were to sum all that together, is there a message worth sending to a particular person that needs it?
Yes. There's a person who we're going to send this one to, a person who studies live performances, especially discussions like moderator, like somebody who trains people to moderate. That's what we're going to do. That's the target for this.
I think that's because there were a lot of relevant topics. We even had the chance to interact with somebody in real time who's throwing curveballs in for us. Thank you, Polar Knights. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I know a few people that would go to, or that would.
Oh no, we can just write it as an open letter to the class of people who.
The class of real-time talk moderators.
Mm-hmm.
There are at least 2 or 3 people who are in the world of improv and stage comedy on our list who would be good people to hear from for this. Sweet. Well, let's wrap things up then for this episode of Precisely Anything. Hey, I can say I feel like a real podcast was in. It's great. Let's wrap this up and then hop back into the backstage and then talk about what our next steps are going to be, and then we can wrap the day.
Yep.
All right. So do I click leave studio?
No, he'll click the button that turns us off live.
Okay.
Good night.
Go ahead and end the screen.
Bye.
Your stream. Thank you, Polar Knights, for jumping in.